Good evening, viewers. You're watching To The Point. I'm Preeti Choudhry. Well, flirtations usually sometimes don't really reach fruition, which is a strong relationship. That seemed to have happened exactly in the case of Mr. Prashant Kishor and the Congress. It's been about 2 years that both the Congress and Prashant Kishor have been meeting, talking, discussing, presentations galore. But today, one thing was made very clear, that Prashant Kishor, at least what the Congress presented on the table right now, whatever their offer was, rejected it. All right, viewers, I want to just take you through on what were the conditions put forth by Prashant Kishor to the Congress on which were non-negotiables for him. Well, massive structural changes was something which was non-negotiable for Prashant Kishor. He was okay to join without any designation at all. It wasn't that he was hankering after certain posts, but he wanted complete party overhaul and he wanted the Congress to actually accept that. On the other hand, to deal directly with the Gandhis. He wanted a line with the Gandhis, but the coterie, the congressmen, and the many, which many would suggest the sycophants around the Gandhis, he did not want to deal with. He wanted sweeping control across various units of the party, that possibly his word on various sweeping units would be final. More so, he would want to continue to maintain old alliances. By what we mean by continuing old alliances, which primarily means, well, he's associated with IPAC. It's a political consultancy. They've done wonders in states like the last one, West Bengal. Well, he wanted to maintain all those deals that he's broken with the IPAC, with the TRS, be it the YSRCP or the TMC. That for him was non-negotiable, and it seemed it was non-negotiable for the Congress as well, with many from the Congress actually calling out Prashant Kishor ideologically agnostic or opportunistic. Now, was it that which broke the back in terms of the deal with the Congress and Prashant Kishor? Well, there was this other lot which actually suggests not quite. There was a lot of water which had gone down the bridge, especially in the changes that Prashant Kishor wanted, and possibly the Gandhis were not entirely on board on that. Whose loss is it? Number one, is it Congress's loss to lose PK, Prashant Kishor, rejecting the offer made by the Congress when the party is already in free fall? Or was Prashant Kishor's joining of the Congress overestimated? Was he that silver bullet that could have solved everything? And lastly, one question which many people from inside the Congress also keep echoing: the more the Congress wants to change or needs to change, the more it remains the same. Prashant Kishor's rejection of the Congress Decoded over the next 20 minutes. Joining me for that is in the studio, Rajdeep Sardesai. He's our consulting editor. I have Rahul, Shrivastava, national affairs editor. I have Sanjay Jha, political analyst. Sanjay, I'm sure you're crestfallen. I had you just 2 days ago on the show, and you made that very clear. The Congress needed PK more than PK needing the Congress. What went down? You must have spoken to a lot of people in your old party.
Yeah, and I can tell you the short answer, Preeti, is that the Congress party is not willing to change. And in my opinion, that is a tragedy for Indian democracy. Because if any party needs to actually not just change but transform, it is the Congress. And if the party hasn't learned, despite terrible setbacks, huge political humiliation. Today, Aam Aadmi Party is doing better than the Congress in Assam in the municipal elections there. It's telling you that the party is actually the existential crisis that we used to talk about on television shows is now close to extinction. And anybody who foolishly believes that because we still have a national footprint of sorts and we still have the opposition leaders in some parts of the state country, I think these are all foolish, shall we say, delusional stuff. Congress party is getting wiped off. And I think you needed a PK to actually disrupt the system, create change, bring an energy. I know so many young people in the Congress who were enthusiastic about the fact that if PK comes in, the Congress party will wake up from its deep slumber. I'm disappointed for the Congress. I'm disappointed as a citizen of this country that the largest political party in terms of governance record in India, that actually governed country for 54 years and has actually built India's democratic institutions, is now happily willing to die.
Rajdeep, that's what, we began the show as well. The more the Congress needs to change, it is in free fall. There is no denial. It needs this massive structural reform. It understands that G23 was echoed, it echoed exactly the same. But is there a complete, especially an instance like this, which goes down, which shows that the Congress is never going to change. It's going to remain the same.
Look, where I will slightly differ from Sanjay Jha is that it's not about individuals. It's not that a Prashant Kishor comes and the Congress will be transformed. The Congress faces far too many structural organization deficiencies that can't be overcome by one person joining it in whatever role he was eventually to join. Where I agree with Sanjay Jha is the Congress at the moment is a patient in ICU. It doesn't need Band-Aid. It needs that transformation. And maybe Prashant Kishor, because of the nature of the person he is, would have been one of the many disruptors that could have been brought in to energize the Congress. The Congress desperately needs new ideas, new ways of thinking, new structures. And Prashant may, in his own way, have facilitated that as one of many. The problem is, who are you relying on? You've gone back to the old, what I call death by committee. You've appointed an empowered committee. What is this empowered committee? Most of it contains Rajya Sabha MPs who cannot win an election. Most of it contains those who've lost a series of elections, those who've been seen as losers. You need to bring in people who people will identify with as potential winners. You need to energize this party, transform it. So, if you are unwilling to do it as a status quoist party, it suggests that you are unwilling to go in for any disruption change, when only till the last week I was being told the Congress is ready for experimentation. My sense, Preeti, is the Congress remains therefore divided. There are those who understand the need for change and recognize that the change cannot be incremental but must be dramatic. And Prashant Kishor would have been part of that process. There are others who believe that if there is change, what happens to us? And their existential crisis is linked to the existential crisis of the Congress, and they were slowly but surely resistant. One final point, where Prashant Kishor also gets it wrong, I think, is that you have to be very clear in politics. You can't create political leaders, as Prashant believes that he can create the brand, and be a leader yourself. So he had to also take that call, and while he claims that he was entering unconditionally, the fact is he wanted clarity on role. Plus, I think he wanted to have his cake and eat it too when you go only last weekend and spend the weekend with K. Chandrasekhar Rao, who in Telangana remains a prime opponent of the Congress party. So I think Prashant Kishor also needed to decide what exactly he wants from public life.
Right.
But more importantly, the Congress needs to recognize that Prashant Kishor could have been one of the catalysts. As I said, not the sole catalyst, but one of the catalysts of a process of change. Because at the moment, if the Congress doesn't change, it's doomed, in my view.
You know, Rajdeep, I want to also just put across, just minutes after this news broke, there was another tweet which also shows all that's going wrong in the Congress and is the Congress right now. And that was a tweet by the former party president of Punjab, Mr. Navjot Singh Sidhu. Perfect timing, I would say, because once again, it draws, the spotlight on what is all that is wrong with the Congress, where he's quite happy with the man in question, which is Prashant Kishor, and saying meeting an old friend like old wine. But, I want to bring in Rahul Shrivastava into this conversation, and taking off from what Rajdeep said. Rahul Shrivastava, was there an overestimation of Prashant Kishor joining the Congress, that he was this magic bullet or the silver bullet that could possibly, solve everything? Many insiders would say either you can be a politician or you can create a politician. Prashant Kishor was confused, more so ideology, agnostic, opportunistic. Would he have the ethos of the Congress?
Preeti, I agree with Sanjay, what he's saying. Remember, what Rajdeep is saying has merit, but the fact remains that when the Congress started talking to Prashant Kishor, there was always an IPAC. So the business interests, all these elements are later. The fact remains that the Congress needed an antidote. It needs a revival. And it is a patient which does not want to change, as Sanjay is saying. If you look at the crisis, Preeti, and if we dissect what has happened, at a time when the Congress is talking revival, there are reporters who are standing outside Congress office talking about inside dope of what is happening. And pundits like Rajdeep are saying that there is a possibility and he could well be one catalyst. Where is Rahul Gandhi? Rahul Gandhi is abroad. Today, how do you signal that this deal was over? How did one get a signal? Is that Priyanka Gandhi in the last 12 hours left the country for a foreign trip? Now, these are elements which indicate that what went wrong. One, Rahul Gandhi was totally opposed to the deal. He was not convinced about Prashant Kishor and his proposals, primarily because there is a lack of trust. And that second element is that does he bring to the table something that the Congress does not know? Second, there was a huge problem that those with the Congress dispensation today and those opposed to it both do not want a Prashant Kishor or somebody who's an outsider. Remember that it is Ashok Gehlot on the 20th of April said that he has become a big brand, PK is now a big name, but he also slipped in that veterans should be consulted. Today morning, Mr. Subhash Garg, the technical education minister in the Rajasthan government, out of the blue, posts on Twitter something very funny. He says that the party needs a Chanakya, not a businessman. Party can be taken forward only by leaders and the Karyakartas.
Right.
Why did this tweet come? Because Mr. Ashok Gehlot is the ventriloquist here, and it is the party's rank and file which is voicing its opposition. There is a whole lot of things. The G23 was extremely wary. It is saying that this was only a way to cover up or camouflage the demand for a leadership change. I think the Congress has lost at least one band-aid which could have come its way.
All right, Sanjay Jha, because you've been speaking to your old colleagues in the Congress, I want to ask you, what was the main issue? Was it the Darbar, the sycophants that possibly Prashant Kishor wanted to get rid of, that got rid of him in the end? Or was there a split where the Gandhis were concerned? Where, there is a train of thought which seems to suggest that Priyanka Gandhi was all in and Rahul Gandhi had reservations, and one of those reservations could have very well been that Prashant Kishor's radical structural reform, that he may not, or, what sources say that Rahul Gandhi not be the prime ministerial face in 2024 for the Congress.
Well, Preeti, the Congress is in such a seriously bad shape that all three of you, Rahul, Rajdeep and yourself, have hit the nail on the head. Now, let me tell you, the culture within the party is such that very few people truly are able to speak whatever are the courage of, their convictions to the high command. The culture in the Congress party is that you do not talk or say anything that can be remotely understood because it can come back to bite you. So in a sense, the inner democracy is dead by its very political culture. However, there is no denying that certain people have access to the Gandhis and whoever may be the senior leaders. Now, you cannot run a party the size of the Congress, the complexity and scale of India, by actually sticking to this, what I call as a prehistoric, archaic, antiquated way of working. It might have worked up to the time of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, but it's a different India. This is an India which has technology, which has social media. The country has got younger. Expectations are to deliver on quick results. Even today, I'm used to politicians who, if they give you a time at 9 o'clock, they should meet you at 9 o'clock. Does it happen in the Congress? I'm not so sure. So I think the fundamental problem with the Congress party, Preeti, is this. The Gandhis are not getting good advice because they've surrounded themselves with the good old caucus. And with due respects to my colleagues in G23, and some of them are going to get very upset with what I'm going to tell you. But the truth is, even members of the G23, many of them were part of the famous Congress Working Committee that never asked for inner party democracy in elections for several years. So, they also have a moral responsibility for the mess that the Congress party is. You cannot be so opportunistic. And third, the Congress party under Rahul in particular has become a risk-averse party that is distrustful of everyone, that is cynical of everyone left, right and center. And I want to tell you on your show, Rahul went public on a program and said that, I was born in power and I have no lust for it. Well, that's Rahul's predicament. The Congress party is a political party. It needs power to protect the ideology and the policies it wants to put forth in India.
All right, Rajdeep, what happens to the Congress from here on? Because everyone was looking at this big, massive structural change that Prashant Kishor will build in. You're looking at Gujarat elections. Naresh Patel is a big question because he was going to come with Prashant Kishor. Where does he go now? But that's just a smaller question. What goes down from here?
How much lower can the Congress sink at the moment is the question I keep asking myself. Where else does it, the only way it can go is up. I would have thought. But the fact is that the party still seems to believe that it is this enduring, durable brand which will eventually, people will tire of Narendra Modi and the BJP and return to the Congress. You know, politics changes, politics transforms itself so fast. We've seen the rise of the Aam Aadmi Party in few states taking away Congress votes, because the Congress, as I keep reiterating, is status quo. There are 9 congressmen, ex-congressmen who are chief ministers in Indian states. They obviously have found life outside the Congress far more fruitful than being in the Congress. The problem, Preeti, is that I think the Congress has over time converted itself into some kind of a family enterprise, like it or not. And I think while you could get away with it in the past, you can't get away with it in the competitive world in which we live today. It's like being in the Indian cricket team, you have to be fit and competitive. The world has changed. The BJP has made politics much more competitive. The Congress doesn't seem to recognize at times that reality. Rahul Gandhi is an idealist, a romantic. But power cannot be poison when you're in politics. When you're in politics, you want power. I think the problem with the Congress is that it needs to resolve its existential crisis. It needs to resolve an ideological crisis, an organizational crisis, and a leadership crisis. Prashant Kishor was not going to be Mr. Fix-It who would change the party overnight. But at least, as I said, he would have energized it. You need some kind of a CEO operating it on a 24/7 basis, 365 days of the year. That's not happening. So where does the Congress go from here? My fear, you mentioned Gujarat, 25 vice presidents and 75 general secretaries have been appointed by the Congress last month. Can such a party really fight the BJP, which has already prepared its micro data for Gujarat? The Congress has no plan for Gujarat. The Congress perhaps has no plan even for Himachal, a state which every 5 years has seen a rotational of chief ministership, much like what we saw in Uttarakhand could well happen in Himachal. Where does the only state at the moment where I think that the Congress has half a chance in the next 1 year is Karnataka, where at least it appears that the Congress has strong, resourceful local leaders who seem ready for the fight. The Gandhis are going to have to decide.
Right.
Are you going to be willing to change, or are you increasingly resistant to change and see any change agent as some kind of an enemy figure? I think there were people in and around Rahul Gandhi in the Congress who saw Prashant as some kind of a outsider who would topple existing elites.
I want to bring in Rahul Shrivastava as well. Is it that the Gandhis are averse to change, or they're averse to stepping aside? Because a lot of the structural reform that possibly Prashant Kishor wanted to build in was rooted through the Gandhis possibly stepping aside. But having said that, the road to 2024, Rahul Shrivastava, is long, and in politics everything is possible. Do you see this door completely shut now because flirtations were on for 2 years, or do you see it like a temporary break? Is baar baat nahi bani, but we'll talk in 6 months where all we stand.
Preeti, that's a hope is always something that one should keep in its heart. But the fact remains that will the factors that have derailed the process today change tomorrow? That will perhaps answer the questions. But today, though Rajdeep is saying, but the fact remains is those questions have been answered, that the Congress does not want to change. If you talk about structural changes, these structures have been created by the Gandhi family at the top of the Congress party. Now, the moment you start talking structural changes, you are talking that people who are in close proximity to the Congress's first family, they may get dismantled, starting from people around Rahul Gandhi. They have gained immense power, as Sanjay said, in the last couple of years. And in that scenario, even they are wary of making space. So the Congress's first family is unable to make space for somebody like Prashant Kishor. The chief minister don't want to, the Karyakartas don't want to, and eventually they all want that the Congress should come back to power.
All right, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to...
Like Rajdeep said about the Congress on ICU, it's almost like the concentric 9 circles in the Divine Comedy by Dante, that the Congress has to sink further eventually to rise.
Well, I'm going to close the bulletin because there are going to be 2 more elections which are right around the corner, which will be the Congress's next test. And most of you would possibly be back in the studio arguing whether to have PK or not to have PK was a good decision or bad, because Himachal and Gujarat dibs that the Congress has in both states, be it Gujarat or the Congress. But for now, the romanticism woven by many supporters of the Congress, well, that has now fallen flat because there is no resurrection by at least Prashant Kishor anytime sooner where the Congress comes into question. Thank you all for joining us. Up next is Shivarur.